Welcome to the Cognitive Crucible, produced by the Information Professionals Association. Our website is information-professionals.org, where you can find links and information about today's conversation and get access to members-only content. Join John Bicknell and explore all aspects of our generational challenge, cognitive security. The Cognitive Crucible is a forum that presents different perspectives and emerging thought leadership related to the information environment. The opinions expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of or endorsement by the Information Professionals Association.
My guest today on the Cognitive Crucible is Doug Wilbur, who is a communication scientist who specializes in propaganda, information warfare, and strategic communication. He is also a retired U.S. Army Information Operations Officer with 4 deployments. He works full-time in the information technology industry and is an adjunct professor of marketing at the University of Maryland Global Campus. Doug Wilbur, welcome to the Cognitive Crucible.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
So the conversation I'd like to have with you today, Doug, will cover propaganda. And I think we'll have kind of like a free-ranging conversation there, which should be really interesting. But before we get into this topic, could we start by getting your assessment of our strategic landscape, or if you prefer, the times in which we live?
Okay. Well, looking at the threats that we face and looking at the emergence of new technologies and how it's going to manifest, it's very easy to see all the storm clouds on the horizon. And we are going to hit it. We are going to get a storm, and things can look very grim and dire when we take full accountability of what we're going to be facing. However, I take kind of an opposite approach to this than a lot of other people. I grew up in the 90s, probably like you, and one of my favorite show is Star Trek: The Next Generation, right? And it's not just about science, it's very philosophical too. Every episode had a philosophical problem. And, the gist of every show was they got some kind of unsolvable problem they don't know how to deal with. They don't have the resources to deal with. It's, serious existential threat. And yet they apply themselves to the problem. They make sure they understand what the problem is. They work together as a team and they think through it. And they work through it, and they're able to always overcome these, somewhat impossible problems, right? Well, I kind of have that attitude when I look at the problems that we're facing today. While there is much peril, there's also much promise. And I am confident that as a society, if we really what if we're honest to ourselves about what we're facing, and we are, approach it from a very serious standpoint, and we think through the problem, and we make the best use of what possible of our resources, I am confident that we can turn this situation very favorably in our way. And I'm not overly optimistic, but I am optimistic about the strategic horizon. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it sounds like you favor the problem-solving abilities of our society. Maybe you appreciate the diversity or the heterogeneity that we bring to problem sets, and even if things are the future is murky, answers to current problems are uncertain, that things are, that we collectively have some kind of an advantage, which has yet to be fully applied to the problem sets.
Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah. All right. Well, so you are, as we read in your bio, you're a strategic communications expert and adjunct faculty member. Do you teach propaganda and these kinds of topics to your students, or is this something that's more, aligned with your military interests, but you're not currently teaching?
Well, I teach marketing to MBA
Marketing.
students and
Marketing.
BBA students. So, no, I went to a very traditional, very old school doctoral program, right? Where you're trained to be a research professor. You write papers, the very old school way of doing things. And every every PhD has an area where they teach, but they also have an area. So based on my degree, I can teach public relations, advertising, marketing, persuasion, those types of things. But every PhD also is supposed to have a research specialty, something that they focus in. So my focus would be on, I would just say, information warfare at this point. More so the human aspects of it rather than like cyber or electronic, because I don't know much about that. But I would say my research specialty is in information warfare, and I enjoy it very much, and I'm seem to be very fruitful with it. And I think I'm just following God's plan for me. I don't know, but I try to, I enjoy doing this because I get feedback from people who read my articles, like they enjoyed it or they ask me questions, and in a way, it kind of makes me feel like I'm still back in the fight. You know.
Sure,
That's-
sure. Yeah. And to our audience, there's three articles by Doug. All of them are open access. So please go check it out. So, all right. Well, propaganda then. So, do you think we could just level set by getting your definition or your outlook on what propaganda is and why it matters?
Yeah, sure. Um, the official definition that I use when I write papers, and I'm required to do it, I use from Jowett and O'Donnell's textbook on propaganda persuasion. Propaganda is, I don't have it written down here, but basically it's any type of communication or behavior intended to influence the behavior of a target audience in a way that benefits the propagandist. I would keep propaganda beyond the scope of just mass media messages into person to person propaganda, like indoctrinations, like the Marxists do they have trained cadres that meet with you and then they indoctrinate you into their faith. And then, all the way to, stuff that's black psyop and you don't even know you're being propagandized. So propaganda covers a wide range of things. And the goal is always to influence you to do something, not necessarily persuade you, because this is a problem that a lot of scholars have. They insist that propaganda is by persuasion, and it's not always by persuasion. And we just know that. I just being in Iraq watching what Al Qaeda did, I know that's not, propaganda. When you detonate a car bomb, they're not trying to persuade you to do anything. They're trying to provoke a civil war. You get the Shiites to fight back so they can kill them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but yeah, follow-up question. So, um, uh, you said it's about influence, but not persuasion. Is that
Well,
what you said?
persuasion is a part of it. Yes,
Uh-huh.
you can persuade, but not all propaganda tries to persuade you, right?
Mm,
Persuasion, and also and gets to a sticky subject, is advertising is perfectly legitimate, ethical, legal for the most part.
hmm
And it is trying to persuade you, but it's not propaganda. Right?
Okay.
So we got to keep in mind that some propaganda definitely tries to persuade you, but not all of it.
So I get what you're saying, but I'm still a little stuck. I'm trying to understand how is uh, marketing and advertising like propaganda, but then technically not propaganda.
Okay, so the best answer to this comes from scholars who study persuasion and advertising and those types of things. There would be two key points between propaganda and what we would call legitimate marketing and advertising, right? The first is that the advertiser is trying to engage you in a type of relationship or dialogue that you can benefit from, right? Because now you know, all advertising is not good. Some advertising is pretty, nefarious. But as a general rule, advertising offers you something, right? If you buy
Mm,
this product, you get something in return, right?
yeah, there's like
Whatever.
a mutually agreed upon exchange, which is, I guess, just part of our economic system. You know, I give you money for something, you give me something that I find valuable, we both benefit.
Yeah, more or less.
Hmm. Okay. Cool. Well, we chatted before recording here, but you mentioned to me a case study from back in Vietnam, which you said is like one of the most successful, recent history propaganda campaigns. Do you think you could sketch that out a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. Let me start from the beginning here.
Sure. Yeah.
So, I was on my this is how I ended up on this journey. Um, I was on my second deployment to Iraq, and during the 2005, 2006, during that time, we started counting dead bodies that we picked up. These are Iraqi on Iraqi murder victims. They're not people, not Iraqis that coalition forces killed, not Iraqis that the police killed, or these are just usually Sunni and Shiite murders, but also some criminal murders. And we were racking up about, I would say, 150 bodies in the greater Baghdad area. 150 bodies a day we're picking up, and this was very perplexing to me, and I wanted to know why. Why was this happening? And I came to the conclusion that it was propaganda. Propaganda was the fuel that was driving all this madness. And at the same time, my wife, my ex-wife, my wife she's Vietnamese, and I went to Vietnam, and I got to experience that. Like every morning at 6 in the morning, there's a loudspeaker that blasts the morning propaganda channel. And my relatives over there say, "Oh, nobody pays attention to it. Nobody listens to it. They just have to do it." And I started thinking, I started and studying the Vietnam War, and I started realizing, well, propaganda was their best weapon,
Hmm.
right? Propaganda is the reason why they won, because they were really damn good at it. And I started immersing myself in this, in what was happening in Vietnam, what happened in Vietnam, and the role of propaganda. And then I basically read everything I get my hands on in propaganda. Most of it is just historical case studies. So I started realizing the Vietnamese are probably the best propagandists who have ever lived, ever. And so let's take the Nazis, for instance, right? Nazis, a lot of propaganda work studies what the Nazis did. Okay. The Nazis, they had great influence within Germany, within Austria. But when you look at their propaganda that was used in other countries, it was a very limited success. It had very limited impact. Yes, there are some Danish and some Norwegians who joined the SS, so they got maybe a couple thousand, 10,000 troops out of it. But on the whole, I mean, it was actually terrible for external audiences. Like if you're in Czech Republic, why would you want to, support the master race that you're not a part of, right? So people generally credited with, the Germans with success, but it's not. It's not. They were not that successful. Well, when you look at what the Vietnamese did, okay. So for instance, there's this one picture I have. It's in one of my papers I have, where it's these two young men in the 1966 or 1965 in Wichita, and one he's like a puppet master. You got one guy on bottom who's like a puppet. He has a sign that says U.S. imperialists, and the other guy's got like the puppet master thing going on, implying that South Vietnam was the American puppet when it was not. Okay. Well, this was the number one propaganda theme that the Vietnamese Communist Party uh, used. South Vietnam was not a legitimate country. It was a colonial puppet of the United States. Now, my ancestors, my wife's relatives at the time who were from Vietnam made that very clear that that was not the case. When we went back there, and we went back to they still have the presidential palace or South Vietnam, and she started crying, saying, "This is my White House." And you know, when you interact with a lot of other Vietnamese, that a lot of Vietnamese did not consider themselves to be puppets of the United States, right? But yet the communists, and this is so basically, I would have to say that the Vietnamese are the best because they were able to influence the decision making, use propaganda to influence the decision making of foreign populations and foreign nations in a way that nobody else was able to successfully do.
Hmm.
The Soviets did have. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I understand the distinction that you're making. Uh, so just kind of like a devil's advocate kind of a question, or so you said that German propaganda. Would it be fair to say that German propaganda was tailored towards an internal audience?
Yes, that would be correct.
Yeah, I mean, and from your research, was that intentional? But and who was this? Was this Girdle? Girdle was one of the masterminds of that. Is that right?
During, yeah. Well, their Nazi ideology was because it's based on race,
Hmm.
because it's based on race and their specific culture. It was never ideal.
It wouldn't resonate
With
with audiences other than German and Austrian audiences.
Yes, more or
I
less.
I the uh, uh, South Vietnamese propaganda was, or is it North Vietnamese
I
propaganda?
would just say Vietnamese communists because they're one and the same.
Okay, Vietnamese communist propaganda was qualitatively different in that it was intended for an external audience and, in your opinion, successful in propagandizing external audiences.
Well, it wasn't specifically just for external audiences. It was an internal. They started off an internally facing propaganda that could
Hmm.
very easily be flipped around and made external, right?
So the Vietnamese communist propaganda had a additional feature to it compared to German propaganda in that it was flexible enough or broadly scoped enough to uh, be effective both internally and externally.
Yes.
Ah,
But that's a facet of Marxist communist ideology is that essentially it's communism is essentially a fundamentalist evangelical religion
hmm.
that can be spread, that is spread throughout the world, right? So, all the Vietnamese took on what the Soviets built, the Bolsheviks, the Soviets, and Mao, and they took it and made it and implemented it in a way that they achieved remarkable success, is what I would say.
Right. And you think that that is at least partially because the communist agenda, or the stated communist goals are goals that just tend to resonate with people, right? This one of my favorite cultural and political commentators is a guy. His name is Jonah Goldberg, and I've heard him say something like this a number of times. But within my family, within my small tribe, I'm a communist, right? I don't treat my two daughters the same. They're very different people. One daughter gets a certain kind of resource, another daughter gets different kind of resource because, to each his own, right? What is the communist saying? My words are failing me here, but it's like to each according to his needs, and or something like that. Haven't you heard something like that before?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. So within my family, I behave as a communist, but there comes a point when your tribe gets bigger, the community gets bigger, and you ladder on up to a town or to a state or to a nation state, there's like an inflection point where the communist agenda, at least in the Western way of thinking about things, just like stops working. But inherently to like our lizard brains or whatever, communism sounds good. It's like, heck yes, why shouldn't we, give to people according to their needs? But it really starts getting distorted and corrupted when you ladder it up to the nation state level. But anyway, maybe I'm getting a little bit far afield, but the point I'm trying to make, or maybe the point I'm agreeing with for you, is that, at just like a very basic level, without having thought through the consequences of a communist nation state, at a very basic level, it makes a lot of sense. And for people who are pissed off at society, or people who haven't feel like they haven't gotten a fair shake, or people who are not in power, a communist agenda sounds really good, right? Heck yes. And so anyway, I'm not sure if there's a question in that, but how does that like overlay into this case study with Vietnam?
Well, I would say if you approach communism as a religion, right?
Mm-hmm.
It has what they call a messianic eschatology,
Okay.
which means that through human effort, you can usher in a utopia. It promises a utopia, right?
Mm.
Now, the fundamental contradiction here is that communism never works. It can never work. It will never work, right? It's based on a fantasy, right? So they're selling you a Ferrari, but in the end, you're gonna get a broke down Chevy.
Right, but because without understanding history, or yeah, at face value, it sounds good. And
Yeah.
what could you unpack just a little bit more what a messianic eschatology means? There's like two different components there, it sounds like, but I mean, this it would be really interesting to hear what you mean by that.
Okay. So let's take the Iran, right? The Shiites in Iran. There is a kind of like a sect within the Shiites called Twelvers, and they believe that if they engage in a certain amount of violence or attack, I'd have to research this again, but they, through their own actions, can trigger the apocalypse, right? And then as a result of triggering the apocalypse, they will bring the Messiah, the Mahdi, they call him, back
Hmm.
to, right? So, messianic is there's a savior, and in communism, Marxist the thought itself, just the basic ideology of communism is like the Messiah, right? And in eschatology means you can, in a religious sense, means you bring about, or is the end times are brought about. Does that make sense?
Yeah, is that what eschatology means? Is like bringing about the end times? Is that what that means?
It could mean other things too. In the context of this argument, yeah, that's generally what it means. I'm not a theologian, so I don't
Yeah,
want
yeah,
to
yeah. Sure, sure,
overstep my
sure.
bounds here.
No.
But ultimately, communists believe that the utopian society is inevitable. It's going to happen no matter what, right? They need to, through their own actions, usher in the the utopian society, right? So in the case of Vietnam, you had they promised the South Vietnamese population the ability to live in a perfect utopian society, despite the facts, by that time, we already knew communism was failing. The Soviet Union had massive famines. It was serious problems. Mao killed like half his population. So in the 1960s, it was already obvious that communism was a completely, thoroughly failed ideology, right? But yet they were, despite this fact, they were still able to sell people on this vision. And they did it very effectively.
What do you have any examples of the kinds of propagandist messaging that was being published or that was being used? And also, how does this go from like internal, um, aimed at an internal audience, but then also being effective with an external audience? And I assume external audience, you mean the rest of the world and the United States in particular?
Yeah. So I would say okay, one of the main propaganda planks that strategies that they used was to delegitimize the elected government of South Vietnam. South Vietnam did have, yeah, there was a lot of corruption, there were a lot of problems, and states who are emerging from a third world status to a first world status, like South Korea, these are problems that are very common, political problems that are very common in those societies, but they eventually grow out of them. So the best thing the communists did was try to convince not only the internal population, but the world that the government of South Vietnam was not a legitimate government and did not have the authority to govern, right? Because it was supposedly just a puppet of the United States. So if the South Vietnamese government was not legitimate, then why would nations like Britain or Pakistan, why would they do anything to help them, right? Just, I think that's the core of probably the core of the issue.
Right.
I don't think I did that well, but
Right, but then so taking that to the United States, are you saying that this propaganda campaign eventually deteriorated the United States' will to continue in
yes,
Vietnam?
absolutely, yes. So, for instance, the Tet Offensive, right?
This was 1968, is that right?
Yeah, 1968 Tet Offensive. Um, I think probably all historians of Vietnam would agree that that was the turning point, right?
Mm.
When Cronkite said this war is hopeless and it's over. That's kind of like when the American people said, "Yeah, we're not going to win this," right?
Mm.
But reality on the ground was completely different. In reality, the Tet Offensive was a remarkable victory, right?
For
For the United States and South Vietnam.
is that right? Okay.
Yeah. So let me just share a story my mother-in-law told me about the Tet Offensive.
Hmm.
The first night of the Tet Offensive, now she was living in right outside Ben Hoa Air Base in near Saigon. She lived in an apartment building, and Ben Hoa was a major target for attack. She said the night of the attack, there was a North Vietnamese girl who was wandering around the hallway in like a stunned state. And she asked her, "What are you doing here? There's a war going on." And she basically said she was there. She was a communist. She was a trained communist cadre who was there to help the people of Vietnam rise up in rebellion against their government, right? So the communists have this one of their four fundamental beliefs is called the myth of the general strike. General strike is when people realize I've had enough of this capitalist bullshit and we need to rise up and fight, right? And they strike. So she was told by her superiors, this North Vietnamese girl, she was told by her superiors that when you get to South Vietnam and the battle starts, people are going to want to follow you. You have to lead that. People are going to want to follow you, right? When she got there, she realized nobody was trying to follow her. Nobody wanted to talk to her. But she didn't know what to do. She was lost. And my mother-in-law told me, look, you got two choices. You can surrender to the Americans and they won't kill you, and they won't rape you, or you can surrender to the South Vietnamese and you will get raped. Those are your choices.
Mm.
She told her to leave before she called the police and shut the door. Right. So, the Tet was a remarkable win. It was a remarkable victory. One of the other, okay, this is another propaganda plank that the communists use. They said that the South Vietnamese army, known as ARVN, were basically worthless and wouldn't fight. Right. As soon as we show up in numbers, they're gonna drop their weapons and turn against us, turn for us. Well, that did not happen. One of the most remarkable things is that the South Vietnamese military fought ferociously against the communists, and they defeat many South Vietnamese units defeated the communists without any help from the Americans, right? So the Tet Offensive, highlights we had this remarkable military victory, yet it was a psychological victory for the communists.
I'd like to transition a little bit, if we may, Doug, from this case study and start relating it to today's environment. I mean, propaganda is alive and well in today's fight with the significant qualitative addition of AI and algorithmically fueled communications. So, how do you talk about today's landscape, and but then also bringing in some of the lessons from history?
Okay, so I would say we face enormous hurdles with propaganda that is fueled by AI, right? Now, this is, granted, it's a weapon, and it's an offensive weapon and a defensive weapon. So we can use these tools against our opponents, and our opponents use these tools against us. But I would say the thing we have to take in mind is that as a free society where we don't censor things generally, a free democratic society with open ability to express ideas openly is at a much greater risk for propaganda than a closed society like China, where everything is heavily controlled. And I think the primary thing we have to worry about is the customizability of propaganda based on data gathering and analysis of online behavior. So in the past, it wouldn't be effective or efficient to try to tailor propaganda to one specific person.
Hmm.
But now, and I'm not saying AI has the ability to do this excellently now, but it will in the future. So let's just say, for instance, there's a scenario I wrote for another article for Small World Journal. Let's say you have a sergeant, right? And let's say that we know based on his data and his behavior, he's kind of impulsive, right? So in about 30 seconds, enemy AI can scan, they can get pictures of his wife, and a picture of his friends, right? And they can make a deep fake porn video pretending that his wife is having an affair with his friend. On the bet and the propaganda and the AI, there's almost no human involvement in this except for direction programming. The AI could figure out, well, maybe if I make a deep fake porn video, he'll kill his wife, right? I know he's impulsive. And then you do that, and the propaganda, the deep fake is so persuasive. It's based because the AI analyzes all her social media pictures, all the social media pictures of the other guy. It can create a pretty good image of what she looks like naked. He flies out, he sees this, he gets this in his feed somehow, his Facebook feed or Twitter feed or whatever. And he sees this, and then he goes off, grabs a hammer, and kills his wife, right? You just neutralized a perfectly good well-trained soldier. And it took about probably AI to 30 seconds to do this, right? But think about that on a mass scale.
But could I just ask a question on this example? So this is a very micro tailored
Mhm.
example, does does that still fit your definition of propaganda?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
It's a natural evolutionary trend based on how the technology is going to unfold. Is that, in my opinion, over time, propaganda is going to keep getting more and more personalized. It's
Mm,
more customizable because in the past there were resource barriers that would prevent us from doing that, right?
hmm
You'd have to have one guy or two guys sitting in a talk somewhere, figuring out how do I get this guy to kill his wife, right?
hmm
And it'll cost money, it takes a lot of effort, whereas AI could probably do it, they could do it in 10 seconds, right?
hmm
So the just from an economic standpoint,
Yeah.
it's going to become more cost effective to have deeply personalized propaganda for every individual that they decide to target than it is to just have a mass message like we used
Mm,
to old days.
right. Right.
Right. So we're gonna have this is going to create a serious problem. I mean, think about it, right? Let's say you have a certain neighborhood in America that is prone to rioting, right?
hmm
AI could very easily make a deep fake video showing they could look at this is the town we're going into. Just use Ferguson, set like Ferguson, right? Okay, they go through the police department uh, website and videos, and they pick one officer. You say, okay, we're going to take this officer, and they go through the criminal or the high school yearbook or whatever, right? And they pick this guy, and we're going to make a video of this cop execution style, pointing a gun at the head of this kid, and they're both images based on real people, and show it, and then spread it out, and then all of a sudden there's going to be rioting. People are going to start burning things and breaking things down, all based on a lie about a police execution that never happened.
mm
Right?
mm
You know, they could trigger that because the more, for instance, if we went to war with the Chinese, um, in my opinion, their strategy is going to try as much chaos as possible because that'll weaken us, right?
hmm
If you have so much civil unrest in a country that you have to completely dedicate the National Guard to suppressing civil unrest and liability, those National Guard troops are not then going to go defend Taiwan or the Philippines or Japan.
hmm Yeah. I guess I want to like uh, foot stomp a couple of things that you said at the beginning. So this is, the uh, uh, propaganda, a long time technique plus AI and today's technology landscape, plus for Western societies and democracies, the U.S. maybe in particular, our open society combining all of this, makes us especially vulnerable to this kind of attack, like you're talking about. And it seems to me like the first wave of the attack, uh, even if like 0.01% of the people who are attacked, take the kind of action that you're talking about, that's going to be just calamitous, right? But then, like, fast forward a couple of weeks or a month or two, we might somehow figure out a collective, counter tactic where it's like, okay, everybody, time out. Everybody, listen up. We're being attacked, okay? If something comes into your feed, or a friend gives you a video of your spouse being unfaithful, or pick some other horrendous thing, take a beat. All right. The answer is not to go and do something immediately. The answer is to say, hang on, let's see what's going on here before we do anything rash. But that's a problem too, right? That I think maybe that's one of the points that you were also making. It's like, okay, fine, we're no longer reacting to these videos that come rolling in. Okay, but now as a society, we are completely decision frozen, like decision gridlocked, right? And so that's a success from the enemy's perspective as well, basically grinding down the gears of decision making so that we are, rendered, useless.
Yeah.
I'm kind of driveling on, but what's your reaction to that?
Well, we are going to have, we're fighting against human nature. Most people will not see a piece of propaganda that's very sensational and say, wait, this doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense. Maybe I'd stop, think about this. Most people, like dual processing models, cognitive psychology, you have route one, which is very fast thinking based on heuristics, like seeing a video, and you have route two thinking, which is very effortful and deliberate way of thinking, but it's also difficult and time taxing of energy, right? Most people will just take route one, and most people will just take what they see on the video and believe it, and they won't sit down and think about it, right? So we're fighting against human nature here. The more people we can get to say, hey, stop. Okay, is this real or not, right? The more people we can get to do that, the safer we'll be. But because we're fighting human nature, there's going to be a large group of people who just simply react to it. I think it's called Glenn Beck calls it the Bubba effect, right? Like after 9/11, you had this one like white supremacist dude go out and kill a Sikh because he thought a Sikh was a Muslim, even though Sikhs are not Muslims and actually hate Muslims. So that, like the Bubba effect, you're going to have that. You're going to have, it's going to cause a lot of problems. My opinion, I think we would have to shut down the internet at that point. I'm pretty certain we have the button to kill the internet, but we might have to push it if we get into a serious conflict.
Wow. Yeah, that's and that would have its own effects that would be challenging for our information-centric critical infrastructure and the commerce and communications and everything. So, wow. Yeah. Well, all right. Well, on that cheery note, how about we wrap up just a little bit, Doug? So I like to ask, especially people like you, what's a good research question that a interested student might explore in order to help advance our knowledge and productivity in this space?
Okay, one thing I would do is if you look at the literature on propaganda, Chinese propaganda, CCP propaganda, most of it deals with English language medium. What are the Chinese saying in English? There's not much information out there about what are the Chinese saying in Swahili or Indonesia, right? We need to have a better understanding of what the Chinese are doing in overseas targeted countries, and more importantly, what effect is it having, right? So if you're a researcher and you speak a unique language, then you should, and you want to be in this space, then go look at what the Chinese are doing in East Africa. What are they saying in Swahili? What are the people? How do the people respond to that? That's, I think, a huge knowledge gap for both, not just theoretical, but more for a practical point.
How do you differentiate what you're suggesting? And I mean, people are already identifying like narratives that China and Russia and Iran are publishing. How do you differentiate narrative discovery, illumination to what you were describing?
Well, I mean, I would say we have to assume that Chinese are tailoring and segmenting their audience using basic marketing principles, segmenting their audience, and adapting narratives that are specific to that audience. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
So you could approach what are the Chinese saying in Swahili the same way you would approach Well, what are they saying in English on their, People's Daily website, newspaper, right? Um, you're taking, it's the same kinds of questions with the same tools to answer them, just in a foreign context, right? It would be good to know what exactly are the Chinese telling the Africans, right? It probably is different than what they're telling us,
Hmm.
right? And obviously, even more importantly, what effect is it having? We need to understand what effect it's having. I I struggled to find anything at all on the effectiveness of Chinese propaganda, especially overseas.
Right. So I mean, there's two parts of your question. What are the Chinese or the Russians communicating to external audiences, for example, African audiences? And crucially, what effect is it having? And I think maybe it's the second part that is especially challenging.
Mhm.
Okay, great. And then lastly, Doug, what is again, to our audience, there's several articles that you can check out by Doug in the show notes. But what's a good book that's either related to propaganda and the kinds of things we've been discussing, or it could just be what's on Doug Wilbur's nightstand these days?
Okay, going back to Vietnam, I'm going to recommend a book about Vietnam.
Okay.
It's written by it's called The Viet Cong, the Organization and Techniques of the National Liberation Front of South Vietnam. It's written in 1966 by a scholar named Douglas Pike. In 1966, information warfare was barely a thing. Information operations didn't exist, right? There was psychological warfare, political warfare, propaganda, but they didn't, it was our thinking about those things were very primitive back then.
Mhm.
Yet this book outlays basically the perfect method, not a perfect method, I can't say that, an excellent method of how to use propaganda to usher in and build a revolution or rebellion, right? He talks about how the cadres were trained and how they went out and they were training like salesmanship techniques almost. Right? How do I convince this poor farmer to believe this thing that's nonsense? Right. Um, so it's basically it's like a case study of one of the most perfect propaganda campaigns we ever faced. How it unfolded. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, sure does. Excellent suggestion, excellent discussion as well. And with that, Doug Wilbur, thank you so much for being
Okay.
a guest on the Cognitive Crucible.
No problem. Thank you.
The Cognitive Crucible is the only podcast dedicated to increasing interdisciplinary collaboration between information operations practitioners, scholars, and policymakers. To find out more about the Information Professionals Association, visit us at information-professionals.org. Please support our podcast by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review.